This story contains themes that some listeners may find disturbing, including discussions of death and crime. Listener discretion is advised. It started subtly, as these things often do. A faint metallic tang in the morning coffee, easily dismissed as a new brand of beans or an old pipe finally giving up the ghost. Then came the complaints, trickling in like the very water itself. A guest on the 5th floor, Mark Thompson, reporting a strange, almost earthy odor emanating from his shower. He chalked it up to the building's age, a charming quirk of the Grandview Hotel, a place that had seen better days but still clung to a faded elegance, its once glorious chandeliers now merely dusty testaments to a bygone era. But then another call. Jessica Lee, a travel blogger known for her meticulous reviews, noticed an unusual film on the surface of her bathwater, a shimmering, almost greasy sheen she couldn't quite rinse away. She was polite, professional, but her tone carried an edge of concern that made the front desk manager, a perpetually stressed young man named Kevin, sit up straighter. Kevin, in turn, called David Miller, the hotel's grizzled, no-nonsense chief of maintenance. David had been at the Grandview for 25 years, practically since the day it first opened its doors. He knew every creak in its ancient floors, every groan of its temperamental boilers, every whisper carried through its ventilation shafts. He'd seen it all: burst pipes, electrical fires, even a minor flood in the ballroom caused by an overzealous wedding guest. Nothing fazed David, or so he thought. He took the complaints seriously, of course. A hotel's reputation, especially an aging one like the Grandview, hinged on the basics: clean sheets, hot water, and a comfortable bed. He checked the filters in the basement, adjusted the water pressure, even flushed a few lines in the guest rooms himself. Nothing seemed amiss. The water flow was strong, the temperature regulated, and to his own experienced nose, the water coming directly from the taps seemed perfectly normal. He told Sarah Jenkins, the hotel manager, that it was probably just a few isolated incidents, maybe a bit of sediment stirred up by a recent citywide pressure test. Sarah, a woman constantly battling budgets and occupancy rates, sighed in relief. One less crisis to manage. But the complaints didn't stop. They intensified. Emily Chan, a corporate consultant staying in a deluxe suite on the 10th floor, called down in a fury. Her skin was itching, she claimed, after her morning shower. A mild rash had broken out on her arms and legs. And the water, she insisted, tasted undeniably off. Not just metallic, but something deeper, something organic, almost stagnant. She demanded to know what was going on. Her voice, usually composed and professional, was now laced with a frantic urgency that sent a shiver down Kevin's spine. This was different. Skin irritation, a persistent, unusual taste. David knew then that this wasn't just a few old pipes or a finicky guest. Something was genuinely wrong. He pulled out his old, dog-eared schematics of the Grandview's plumbing system, tracing the lines from the main city connection all the way up to the rooftop water tanks. There were 2 of them, massive cylindrical behemoths tucked away on the highest point of the hotel, supplying every tap, every shower, every ice machine in the building. They were cleaned annually, inspected regularly. He'd personally overseen the last inspection just 6 months prior. He couldn't imagine what could be wrong up there. Climbing onto the roof of the Grandview was always an experience. The city skyline stretched out, a glittering panorama of steel and glass, contrasting sharply with the weathered brick and tar of the old hotel. The air was thick with the humid exhaust of the AC units, a constant mechanical hum that vibrated through the soles of his boots. He walked past the massive ventilation shafts, their grills coated in a fine layer of urban grime, towards the far corner where the water tanks stood guard. They were enormous industrial-grade steel cylinders, each easily 20 feet high and 15 feet across, painted a dull protective gray. A narrow metal ladder led up to a small access hatch on the side of each tank. David had climbed these ladders hundreds of times. He knew the feeling of the cool metal against his hand, the rhythmic clang of his tools as he ascended. But today, a strange sense of unease settled over him. The air around the tanks felt heavy, almost oppressive. And there it was again, faint at first, then growing stronger as he approached. A peculiar odor. It wasn't the usual damp, metallic smell of stagnant water. This was something else. A sickly sweet, earthy smell, tinged with a chemical sharpness that made his stomach churn. It reminded him vaguely of something he couldn't quite place, something unsettling. He reached the first tank, the larger of the 2, and began his ascent. Each rung felt heavier than the last. He reached the hatch, unlatched the heavy bolts, and slowly, deliberately, pushed open the circular lid. A blast of humid, fetid air escaped, hitting him full in the face. The smell was overpowering now, a putrid cocktail of decay and something vaguely antiseptic. He gagged, stepping back momentarily, his hand instinctively clamping over his mouth and nose. "What in God's name?" he muttered, his voice raspy. He peered into the dark opening. The interior of the tank was typically lit by a powerful internal spotlight during cleaning, but now only the ambient light from the rooftop filtered in, casting long, wavering shadows across the surface of the water below. It was impossible to see clearly. The water, usually a pristine, if slightly chlorinated, blue-green, now looked murky, almost opaque. A strange, iridescent film shimmered on its surface, catching the light in grotesque patterns. And beneath that film, something else, something darker, seemed to be swirling almost imperceptibly. David's heart began to pound, a frantic drumbeat against his ribs. He felt a cold dread seep into his bones, a primal fear that had nothing to do with faulty plumbing. He grabbed his heavy-duty flashlight from his tool belt, switched it on, and aimed its powerful beam downwards, piercing the gloom. The light cut through the murk, revealing the churning, discolored water, the strange film, and then a shape. It wasn't immediately discernible, not in its entirety. Just a suggestion of form, a dark, irregular mass partially submerged, partially floating. It was larger than any debris or sediment could ever be, too strangely contoured. A sickening familiarity began to form in the back of David's mind, a horrifying realization that threatened to overwhelm him. He leaned closer, his breath catching in his throat, his hand trembling so violently the flashlight beam danced wildly across the water. Then the beam settled. It landed on a patch of mottled, discolored skin, a pale, unnaturally smooth surface, puckered and distorted by prolonged immersion, and attached to it, a dark, matted tangle that could only be hair. David stiffened, his entire body locking up. The air was knocked from his lungs. The smell became unbearable, a nauseating truth that now had a horrifying visual confirmation. He couldn't scream. He couldn't even breathe. All he could do was stare at the impossible, grotesque reality floating in the Grandview Hotel's main water supply. A body. Human body. The world tilted. The city skyline, usually a source of comfort, now seemed to mock him, indifferent to the unspeakable horror he had just uncovered. Every complaint, every strange taste, every itchy rash, every metallic tang suddenly made sickening, horrifying sense. For days, perhaps even longer, hundreds of guests, including himself, had been drinking, bathing, and brushing their teeth with water that had been tainted by this. By her. Because as his flashlight beam finally, agonizingly, illuminated a distorted, almost serene face, eyes wide open and staring blankly into the murky depths, David knew with absolute chilling certainty that it was a woman. His mind reeled. Who was she? How did she get in there? And perhaps the most terrifying question of all, how long had she been silently lurking, a macabre secret, in the Grandview Hotel's water tank? The implications were staggering, apocalyptic. A hotel's ultimate nightmare had just become a chilling reality. This wasn't just a maintenance issue. This was a crime scene, a public health catastrophe, and the beginning of a mystery that would unravel the very foundations of the Grandview Hotel and everyone connected to it. The shrill scream of the maintenance worker, a man named Gary, echoed through the service corridors, quickly followed by the frantic thud of his boots descending the metal stairs. Panic, raw and unadulterated, rippled through the usually placid hum of the Grandview Hotel's operations. Within minutes, the first police sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder until their piercing cry enveloped the historic building. A cluster of patrol cars, their lights flashing a frantic rhythm of red and blue, converged on the hotel's main entrance, followed swiftly by unmarked sedans carrying detectives and forensic teams. The rooftop, usually a desolate space reserved for HVAC units and the vast, silent water tanks, transformed into a hive of grim activity. Yellow crime scene tape, stark against the gray sky, began to delineate the area, sealing off the horrifying discovery from the world below. Detective Miles Corbin, a man whose face carried the permanent etch of too many late nights and too many unsolved cases, stepped onto the roof, his gaze immediately drawn to the gaping maw of the water tank. The air was thick with a metallic, stagnant odor, an unnatural scent that clung to the oppressive humidity of the afternoon. Corbin, a veteran of the city's homicide unit for over 2 decades, had seen things that would curdle the blood of lesser men. But even he felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach as he peered into the murky depths. The water, once a clear, life-sustaining element, now swirled with a putrid greenish-brown hue. And there, partially submerged, a grotesque silhouette. The body, bloated and disfigured, was unmistakably human. A man. "Forensics is on its way, detective," a young officer reported, his voice tinged with a visible tremor. "We've secured the area." No immediate signs of forced entry to the roof access hatch, but it's an old lock, easy to pick. Corbin nodded, his eyes scanning the perimeter. The rooftop was a maze of pipes, vents, and condensers. Footprints or any other sign of a struggle would be difficult to discern on the grimy, gravel-strewn surface. His mind, however, was already racing, piecing together the initial, horrifying implications. A body in the hotel's main water supply. Not just a murder, but a public health nightmare of colossal proportions. The health department was notified immediately, their response swift and severe. The Grandview Hotel, a beacon of luxury and elegance for generations, was ordered to evacuate. Guests, many still in a state of bewildered confusion, were ushered out by frantic staff, their weekend getaways or business trips abruptly terminated by an unseen terror lurking in their very drinking water. The news, once it inevitably broke, would ignite a firestorm. Arthur Henderson, the Grandview's impeccably dressed general manager, arrived on the roof, his face ashen, his usual composure utterly shattered. His hands trembled as he gestured wildly, trying to explain the unexplainable. "Detective, this is impossible. Our security is top-notch. Our maintenance team inspects these tanks regularly. How could this happen?" His voice cracked with a mixture of disbelief and utter despair. The Grandview was his life, his legacy. This incident would be its death knell. Corbin turned to him, his expression grim. "Mr. Henderson, we'll figure that out. Right now, my priority is the victim. Do you have any missing persons reports among your staff or guests? Anyone who might have had access to this roof?" Henderson ran a hand through his thinning hair, his eyes darting from Corbin to the ominous water tank. "Missing persons? No, not that I know of. Everyone's accounted for on the staff roster. And guess we have hundreds. It's a busy weekend." He swallowed hard. "Access to the roof is strictly restricted to authorized maintenance personnel. There's a key, a logbook." "I'll need that logbook, Mr. Henderson, and a full list of all staff with access, past and present, going back at least a year." Corbin's gaze returned to the tank. The sheer audacity of the crime was staggering. To dispose of a body in such a visible, yet hidden location within a bustling hotel was either the work of a madman or someone intimately familiar with the hotel's inner workings and vulnerabilities. Forensic technicians, clad in white hazmat suits, began their painstaking work. The removal of the body from the tank was a delicate, gruesome operation that took hours. The medical examiner, Dr. Lena Hansen, a sharp, no-nonsense woman with an unnerving calm, made her preliminary observations. Male, Caucasian, significant decomposition, consistent with being in water for, I'd estimate, anywhere from 3 days to a week, maybe more. Impossible to tell definitively until we get him back to the lab. No obvious trauma visible externally right now, but the state of the body, it's going to be a challenge to determine cause of death. The confirmation of the time frame sent a fresh wave of dread through everyone present. 3 days to a week. That meant hundreds, possibly thousands, of guests and staff had been unknowingly consuming water contaminated by a decomposing human body. The potential health ramifications were terrifying. As the body was carefully bagged and lowered, a small laminated ID card floated to the surface of the murky water, dislodged by the movement. A forensic tech carefully fished it out. "Detective, looks like a hotel staff ID." Corbin took the card. The photo, though waterlogged and faded, showed a young man with kind eyes and a friendly smile. The name printed below it was Daniel Miller. Below that, his position, assistant chef. Daniel Miller, an employee of the Grandview. The revelation sent a jolt through the already tense atmosphere. This wasn't some random act of violence. This was internal. Someone had killed a member of the Grandview staff and then, with chilling premeditation, dumped his body into the hotel's water supply. The implications were immense, the questions multiplying with terrifying speed. How did Daniel Miller end up in the water tank? Was he murdered elsewhere and then moved? Or was the tank itself the scene of the crime? Who would want to kill an assistant chef? And why such a horrific public method of disposal? The initial shock began to morph into a chilling understanding. The Grandview Hotel wasn't just a place where a body was found. It was a labyrinth of secrets, a gilded cage where a killer had walked among them, undetected for days. The luxury facade had crumbled, revealing a dark, festering core. The hunt for Daniel Miller's killer had begun, and it promised to expose not just a murderer, but the hidden lives and simmering resentments beneath the polished surface of the city's most prestigious hotel. The body in the water tank was just the first horrifying drop in what would become a torrent of revelations. The piercing wail of sirens shattered the morning calm that had previously enveloped the Grandview Hotel. What began as a routine maintenance check spiraled into a gruesome discovery, drawing the full, unblinking gaze of the city's law enforcement. Uniformed officers, their faces grim, quickly established a perimeter around the elegant, sprawling building, their presence a stark contrast to the hotel's usual air of hushed luxury. Guests, roused by the commotion, peered from their windows, their curiosity quickly giving way to a chilling apprehension as the nature of the emergency became clear. Up on the roof, under a sky that had just hours before promised a beautiful day, the scene was a macabre tableau. The massive cylindrical water tank, a vital artery of the hotel's infrastructure, now held a horrifying secret. Detective Michael Reed, a man whose career had been a relentless march through the city's darkest corners, surveyed the scene with a practiced, weary eye. His partner, Detective Sarah Miller, a sharp, methodical investigator known for her keen observations, stood beside him, notepad already in hand. "Well, this is a first," Michael muttered, his gaze fixed on the partially opened access hatch of the tank. Of all the places to hide a body, the maintenance worker, a man named David Chun, who had made the discovery, stood trembling beneath the watchful eyes of uniformed officers, recounting his ordeal in a shaky voice. He had been performing a routine inspection of the hotel's water filtration system when he noticed a peculiar odor, faint at first, then growing stronger. Thinking it was a malfunction or contamination, he'd climbed the ladder, unlatched the heavy access panel, and peered inside. The image that greeted him would likely haunt his nightmares for years to come. The pale, lifeless form of a woman, partially submerged in the murky water, her hair fanning out around her like a grotesque halo. She was just floating there, David stammered, his eyes wide with remembered horror. I almost touched her. I just thought, God, I don't know what I thought. Michael nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. You did the right thing, David. You didn't touch anything else. No, sir. Just closed the hatch and called security. They called you guys. The forensics team, clad in white hazmat suits, moved with a quiet efficiency, their equipment glinting in the morning sun. The removal of the body from the water tank was a painstaking, delicate process, complicated by the confined space and the need to preserve every possible piece of evidence. As the woman's body was finally brought out, laid carefully onto a tarp, a collective gasp rippled through the small group of investigators. She was young, perhaps in her late 20s or early 30s, dressed in what appeared to be expensive, though now waterlogged, clothing. There were no obvious signs of struggle on her visible skin, but the water had done its work, distorting features and obscuring details. No ID on her yet, Michael, Sarah reported, having quickly scanned the immediate area. No purse, no wallet, no phone. Nothing. Of course not, Michael sighed, running a hand over his tired face. That would be too easy. Check the pockets carefully. And let's get a full sweep of the roof. Every inch. This isn't exactly an easy place to get to, let alone drag a body. The roof of the Grandview was not accessible to the general public. It required keycard access through a service stairwell, and then another locked door leading directly onto the rooftop maintenance area. This immediately narrowed the field of suspects. Either the killer had insider knowledge, access to hotel master keys, or they were incredibly resourceful and managed to bypass multiple security layers. Security footage, Michael instructed. Every camera facing this side of the building, every entrance, every service elevator, every stairwell, from the last 48 hours. And I want a list of everyone who accessed the roof in that time frame. Maintenance, security, anyone. The initial scene was baffling. There were no signs of forced entry to the roof access door, no broken locks. It suggested a level of familiarity with the hotel's security protocols. The thought alone sent a chill down Michael's spine. This wasn't some random act of violence. This was calculated. Meanwhile, downstairs, the hotel management was in a state of controlled panic. Mr. Harrison Thorne, the Grandview's impeccably dressed general manager, a man usually radiating an aura of calm authority, now looked visibly shaken. He paced his opulent office, fielding calls from concerned guests and frantic board members, while simultaneously trying to cooperate with the police. "Detective Reed, this is an absolute catastrophe," Thorne stated, his voice tight with suppressed anxiety. "The Grandview has never experienced anything remotely like this. Our reputation, it's everything." "With all due respect, Mr. Thorne," Michael replied, his voice firm, "we're less concerned with your reputation and more concerned with finding a murderer. We need your full cooperation. Every guest list, every employee roster, every security log. And I need to speak with everyone on your staff who was on duty last night, particularly those with access to the roof or service areas." Thorne swallowed hard. "Of course. Anything you need. This is unprecedented." Sarah, ever observant, noticed the subtle tremor in Thorne's hands, the way his eyes darted around the room, avoiding direct prolonged contact. Was it just the shock of the situation? Or something else? Back on the roof, the medical examiner, Dr. Evelyn Shaw, a woman with a sharp mind and an even sharper wit, was conducting her preliminary assessment. "Time of death is tricky with the water," she explained, her voice precise. "But I'd put it sometime in the last 24 to 36 hours. No obvious external trauma that would be immediately fatal, but I won't know for sure until I get her back to the morgue. She's been in the water for a significant period though. Long enough for skin slippage to start, and for some bloating." "Any defensive wounds?" Michael asked, trying to keep his expression neutral. "Can't tell yet. The water has done a number on her. But I can tell you this much, Detective. She didn't climb in there herself. And she certainly didn't drown in that tank. There are no signs of water in her lungs consistent with drowning. She was dead before she was put in the water." That detail hung heavy in the air. This wasn't a suicide. This was a murder. And the water tank was merely a dumping ground, a macabre attempt to conceal the crime and dispose of the evidence. But why a water tank? Was it meant to dissolve evidence? To make identification impossible? Or was there a more twisted, symbolic meaning behind it? The thought made Michael's stomach churn. As the body was carefully secured and transported away, Michael looked around the roof again. The vast expanse of the city stretched out below, indifferent to the tragedy unfolding at the Grandview. He focused on the details, the faint scuff marks near the tank barely visible, a tiny, almost imperceptible tear in the asphalt roofing material near the edge of the tank's platform, as if something heavy had been dragged. And then near the access ladder, a small glinting object caught his eye. He bent down, carefully extracting it with gloved hands. It was a single intricately designed earring, a small sapphire surrounded by delicate silver filigree. It was exquisite, expensive, and clearly belonged to the victim. But why was it lying outside the tank? Had it fallen off during the struggle? Or during the killer's hasty disposal? "Sarah, take a look at this," Michael said, holding up the earring in a clear evidence bag. "Found it near the ladder." Sarah leaned in, her brow furrowed. "That's high-end. Doesn't look like something you'd wear doing maintenance. Our victim was probably a guest, or someone with money. Or someone who worked for someone with money," Michael countered, his mind already racing through the possibilities. "Either way, it's a lead. Let's see if we can trace this design. And I want to know who checked into the Grandview wearing jewelry like this in the last 2 days. Or who didn't check out." The hotel's security footage was the next crucial step. Hours were spent sifting through grainy black and white images, the endless parade of guests and staff members moving through lobbies, hallways, and service corridors. The Grandview had an extensive network of cameras, a testament to its commitment to security, which now served as a double-edged sword. A potential goldmine for the police, but also a glaring indictment of how a murder could have occurred within its walls. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Sarah called out, "Michael, take a look at this. Service elevator just before midnight last night. Someone coming up." The footage showed a figure, obscured by the low light and the angle of the camera, pushing a large, wheeled laundry cart into the service elevator. The cart was piled high with what looked like fresh linens, but its size and bulk seemed unusual for a single individual to be managing, especially at that late hour. The figure was wearing a hotel uniform, but the hood of a sweatshirt was pulled up, effectively concealing their face. "They're going to the upper floors," Sarah observed, pointing at the elevator panel light that illuminated for the top floors. "And that cart, it's awfully big, could hide a lot more than just laundry." Michael's eyes narrowed. "That's our guy or gal. The question is, which floor did they get off on? And who are they?" The security log showed no authorized access to the roof via the service elevator after hours by any staff member fitting that description. The figure in the footage was a ghost, a phantom moving through the hotel's arteries, seemingly unnoticed. The incident report from the previous night was clean. No disturbances, no alarms, no suspicious activity reported. It was as if the hotel itself had conspired to keep the killer's movements a secret. This meant one of two things. Either the killer was incredibly cunning, meticulously planning their movements to avoid detection, or they had an accomplice on the inside, someone who knew the blind spots, the camera angles, the routines, and how to make a body disappear without a trace. The Grandview Hotel, once a symbol of opulence and exclusivity, was now an unwilling stage for a murder investigation that promised to unravel more than just the identity of a killer. It was clear that the body in the water tank was not an isolated incident, but the grim opening act to a much larger, darker drama lurking beneath the polished veneer of luxury. The search for the victim's identity became paramount, the first domino in a chain that would inevitably expose not just a murderer, but the hidden lives and simmering resentments beneath the polished surface of the city's most prestigious hotel. The body in the water tank was just the first horrifying drop in what would become a torrent of revelations. The discovery of Sarah Jenkins' body sent a seismic shockwave through the opulent halls of the Grand Regency. It was maintenance worker Mike Rodriguez who made the grim find. His screams had echoed across the rooftop, cutting through the morning calm, an alien sound in a place usually reserved for hushed luxury and panoramic city views. Police swarmed the hotel within minutes, their flashing lights painting the polished marble lobby an urgent, unwelcome red. The initial chaos was a masterclass in controlled panic. Hotel management, led by the stoic general manager Mr. Thompson, scrambled to contain the news, issuing vague statements about a maintenance issue to curious guests, while simultaneously cooperating with law enforcement. But there was no containing a discovery this macabre. A woman dead in the very water supply of one of the city's most prestigious establishments. The story leaked like a sieve, and by midday, every major news outlet had helicopters buzzing overhead, their cameras zoomed in on the gleaming rooftop, a stark contrast to the grim reality unfolding beneath them. The lead investigator, Detective Michael Miller, was a man whose career had been built on sifting through the dregs of human depravity. His face, etched with years of grim experience, rarely betrayed emotion. Beside him stood Detective Emily Davis, sharp, observant, and with a reputation for spotting details others missed. They stood on the rooftop, the wind whipping at their jackets, as forensic technicians meticulously processed the scene around the massive cylindrical water tank. The air was thick with the metallic tang of stagnating water and something else, something undeniably final. Retrieving Sarah's body had been a delicate, agonizing process. The tank, designed for holding thousands of gallons of water, was a confined, echoing tomb. Special equipment was needed, and the paramedics, usually focused on saving lives, now worked with a somber reverence, treating the deceased with the dignity she had been denied in her final moments. When she was finally brought out, wrapped in a white sheet, the raw horror of it all settled heavily on everyone present. Sarah Jenkins was young, barely 24. Her identity had been confirmed quickly through hotel staff records, and a missing persons report filed just 2 days prior by her worried roommate. She had been a front desk clerk at the Grand Regency for less than a year, new to the city, full of quiet ambition. Now she was a case file, a victim, a chilling enigma. The initial examination of the rooftop offered few immediate answers. There was no forced entry to the access door leading to the roof. The lock was intact, suggesting either a key was used, or the killer had climbed over a formidable barrier. No obvious signs of a struggle near the tank itself. No blood, no discarded weapons, no footprints inconsistent with maintenance staff. It was almost too clean, too precise. That, Miller knew, was often the most unsettling clue of all. She wasn't dragged up here, not visibly anyway, Emily observed, her eyes scanning the perimeter. Or if she was, they cleaned it up perfectly. Miller nodded, his gaze fixed on the tank. And getting her into that tank, it wouldn't have been easy. Even for one person. It's a tight squeeze, and she's not a small woman. The medical examiner's preliminary report came in late that evening. Cause of death was blunt force trauma to the back of the head, followed by drowning. She had been unconscious or barely conscious when she entered the water. The ME estimated she had been in the tank for approximately 3 to 4 days. This time frame was crucial. It meant she had gone missing sometime late last week, right before her roommate filed the report. So someone knocked her out, then put her in the tank, Emily summarized, flipping through her notes. No signs of sexual assault, no defensive wounds that we can see yet. This wasn't a random attack, Miller. This was personal or premeditated. Miller leaned back in his chair, the glow of the station lights reflecting in his tired eyes. Or both. What do we know about Sarah Jenkins? They started with her life at the Grand Regency. Interviews with shocked and grieving colleagues painted a picture of a polite, somewhat reserved young woman. She was well-liked, but not someone who stood out dramatically. She kept to herself, often spending her evenings reading or sketching in her room. No known enemies, no obvious conflicts, no high-profile relationships. A quiet life brutally interrupted. Her roommate, Jessica Hayes, was distraught. She described Sarah as a dependable friend, someone who always showed up for her shifts, always called if she was going to be late. The last time Jessica saw Sarah was Thursday evening, when Sarah left for her night shift at the hotel. Sarah had texted her around 11 p.m., saying she was heading home after her shift ended at midnight. But she never came back. Jessica had waited, then called, then contacted the hotel and finally the police. The hotel's security footage became their next obsession. The Grand Regency boasted a state-of-the-art surveillance system, cameras covering every hallway, every entrance, every common area. But the rooftop was a blind spot. For security reasons and perhaps to maintain an illusion of privacy for certain high-profile guests, the camera coverage on the roof was minimal, focusing only on the access points, not the entire expansive area or the water tanks themselves. They meticulously reviewed footage from Thursday night into Friday morning. Sarah was seen clocking out at midnight, just as Jessica had been told. She walked through the lobby, exchanged a brief, polite word with the night manager, Mark Stevens, and exited through the main doors. Then nothing. She left the building, Emily said, a note of frustration in her voice. If she left, how did she end up back in the water tank? Unless, Miller mused, she didn't actually leave, or she came back, or someone else took her. They re-examined the footage. Sarah's departure seemed genuine. She was wearing her street clothes, carrying her small purse. No one appeared to be following her, no one was lurking. The street footage from nearby public cameras was equally unrevealing. Sarah simply vanished into the city night. But the hotel itself was a labyrinth of possibilities. Employee entrances, service elevators, back corridors. What if she had left, and then something had compelled her to return? Or what if she had never truly left? The hotel operated 24/7, a living, breathing entity with its own secret rhythms. Miller ordered a full sweep of the hotel's digital records, keycard access logs, employee schedules, guest manifests, even maintenance requests from the past week. Every piece of data was a potential breadcrumb. The Grand Regency's reputation was already taking a severe hit. Guests were checking out in droves. The sleek, modern hotel, once a symbol of urban sophistication, now felt like a mausoleum, its quiet luxury replaced by an oppressive pall of dread. The staff, already shaken by the discovery, became increasingly wary. Everyone was a suspect, everyone was under scrutiny. Mark Stevens, the night manager Sarah spoke to, was one of the first to be questioned in depth. He was a meticulous man, slightly obsessive about schedules and procedures. He confirmed Sarah had clocked out and wished her a good night. He remembered nothing unusual about her demeanor, nor did he see anyone else suspicious around her. He had been on duty all night, overseeing the quiet operations, making his rounds. His alibi appeared solid, corroborated by other staff members and his own diligent logs. But Miller knew that appearances could be deceiving, especially in a place like the Grand Regency, where maintaining an image was paramount. Beneath the veneer of professionalism, secrets festered. The hotel, with its intricate hierarchy and transient population of guests and staff, was a microcosm of society, complete with its own power struggles, jealousies, and hidden desires. Emily, meanwhile, focused on Sarah's personal life. Beyond Jessica, Sarah had few close friends in the city. Her family lived across the country. She was, in many ways, isolated, a fact that made her vulnerability all the more poignant. She had no known boyfriend, no recent arguments with anyone. Her phone records revealed mostly calls to Jessica and her family. Her social media was sparse, mundane. It's like she was a ghost even before she died, Emily murmured, sifting through Sarah's sparse digital footprint. No drama, no enemies, no grand passions. Just quiet. Quiet people can have the loudest secrets, Emily, Miller replied, his gaze sweeping across the panoramic window of the interrogation room, where the city lights twinkled indifferently. And quiet places like this hotel, they're often the best at keeping them. The investigation expanded. Every employee who had worked a shift that overlapped with Sarah's final hours was interviewed. Every guest who had checked in or out during the crucial time frame was flagged. The hotel's meticulously kept records, once a source of pride, now became a burden, an overwhelming mountain of data to sift through. The police also focused on the rooftop access. Who had keys? Who had access codes? Maintenance staff, security personnel, a few senior managers. Each one had a reason to be there, or at least the means. And each one now had an unshakable cloud of suspicion hanging over them. The pressure mounted. The city demanded answers. The hotel demanded a resolution. But the more Miller and Davis dug, the deeper the mystery seemed to become. Sarah Jenkins, the quiet front desk clerk, had somehow become the epicenter of a storm that threatened to rip apart the very foundations of the Grand Regency. Her death wasn't just a murder. It was a breach, a violation of the unspoken contract of safety and luxury the hotel promised. And as the initial shock began to wear off, replaced by a cold, persistent dread, the hunt for her killer began to peel back the layers of a world far more complex and dangerous than anyone had imagined. The water in that tank had held more than just a body. It held a story waiting to be told, drop by agonizing drop. The water in that tank had held more than just a body. It held a story waiting to be told, drop by agonizing drop. The first light of dawn was a cruel, clinical glare on the rooftop of the Grandview Hotel. Below, the city was just beginning to stir, oblivious to the macabre discovery that had shattered the quiet of the night. Up top, however, a tightly choreographed ballet of grim purpose was underway. Yellow crime scene tape fluttered in the nascent breeze, delineating the grim stage. Forensics technicians, moving with practiced efficiency, documented every inch of the massive water tank and its immediate surroundings. The air, thick with the metallic tang of dried blood and the faint, acrid scent of chlorine, hung heavy with unspoken questions. Detective Michael Vance, a man whose face seemed permanently etched with the weight of every case he'd ever worked, stood by the perimeter, his gaze fixed on the now empty tank. His partner, Detective Jessica Riley, sharp and analytical, scribbled notes into a small waterproof pad. Vance had seen it all, or so he thought, but a body in a hotel water tank? That was a new kind of twisted. No obvious signs of forced entry on the roof access hatch, Vance, Jessica reported, not looking up from her pad. Looks like it was either left unlocked or opened by someone with a key. No pry marks, no broken locks. Vance grunted, a sound that conveyed a multitude of weary thoughts. So, either a staff member or someone who got their hands on a key, or someone who knew the routine. Their initial priority had been identification, and that had come quickly, though the news was no less devastating for it. Emily Hayes, 28 years old, from out of state, a promising data analyst attending a conference in the city. Her family had been notified, and their shock and grief had echoed even through the phone lines. Now, the focus shifted to the how and the why. The body had been carefully removed, transported to the medical examiner's office. Dr. Miller, the city's veteran had promised preliminary findings by midday. Vance knew those findings would be the true starting gun for their investigation. As the sun climbed higher, painting the urban landscape in harsh, unforgiving light, a call came through from Dr. Miller. Vance took it, his voice low, his face grimacing as he listened. Jessica watched him, reading the subtle shifts in his expression. When he hung up, his eyes, usually a dull slate gray, seemed to sparkle with a cold, hard resolve. She wasn't alive when she went into that tank, Jess, Vance stated, his voice flat. Dr. Miller confirmed it. Cause of death: blunt force trauma to the back of the head. A single powerful blow, consistent with a heavy object or a severe fall, but the pattern suggests a deliberate strike. No water in her lungs, no signs of drowning. Jessica's pen froze over her pad. So, someone killed her elsewhere, then moved her to the tank. That changes everything. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't some random opportunistic attack that escalated. This was calculated. Premeditated. Exactly, Vance agreed. And it means the water tank wasn't just a hiding place. It was a disposal method designed to obscure the timeline, maybe even the cause of death. Or worse, to send a message. Their first stop was the hotel manager, Mr. David Chan. A man in his late 40s, impeccably dressed but visibly shaken, his face pale, his composure cracking around the edges. He met them in a small windowless office, the air thick with the scent of stale coffee and desperation. "Detectives," Chan began, his voice strained. "This is unprecedented. The Grandview prides itself on its security, its reputation. We've never had anything like this. Mr. Chun, we understand your concerns, but right now our focus is on finding Emily Hayes' killer," Vance said, his tone firm but not accusatory. "Can you tell us about Ms. Hayes' stay? When did she check in? Did she have any visitors? Any complaints?" Chan flipped through a digital ledger on his tablet. "She checked in 3 days ago. Room 1412. Standard business traveler. Paid with a corporate card. No unusual requests, no complaints. No registered visitors. What about your security protocols?" Jessica interjected. "Access to the roof? Surveillance cameras." Chan straightened, a flicker of professional pride cutting through his fear. "We have extensive CCTV coverage, detectives. Every hallway, every entrance, every public area. Access to the roof is strictly controlled. Key card access only, for authorized personnel. Maintenance engineering. The cards are locked. And the specific hatch to the water tank?" Vance pressed. "Was it locked?" Chan hesitated, his gaze darting away. It should have been. Always. But we had some routine maintenance on the HVAC system on the roof last week. A contractor, Apex Mechanical, was up there. They're supposed to report all keys and access protocols when finished. "So, it might have been left unsecured?" Jessica asked, her voice sharpening. Chun wrung his hands. "It's possible. I'll have my head of security pull the access logs for the roof immediately. And the contractor's documentation." Vance nodded. "Good. We'll also need a list of all guests on the 14th floor. And anyone who checked in or out between midnight 2 nights ago and yesterday morning. And a full staff roster for the same period. Plus, any footage from cameras covering the stairwells and elevators for the 14th floor. And all roof access points." Leaving the increasingly flustered Mr. Chan, Vance and Jessica headed to Emily's room, 1412. It had been sealed by forensics, but now they had access. The room was immaculate, almost disturbingly so. A half-empty bottle of sparkling water sat on the nightstand. A neatly folded business suit lay across a chair. Her toiletries were arranged with precision in the bathroom. There were no signs of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no broken glass. It was as if she had simply vanished, leaving behind a perfectly staged scene. "She was meticulous," Jessica observed, her eyes scanning every detail. "Or someone cleaned up very, very thoroughly." Vance moved to the desk, where Emily's laptop was still open, displaying a spreadsheet. A few pens were neatly arranged in a holder, alongside a small stack of business cards for her tech firm. But something felt off. Vance picked up the pen holder. "Only 3 pens here. Doesn't seem right. Most people have more than that, especially if they're working." Jessica leaned in. "And look at these cards. All standard issue for Synergy Tech Solutions. Nothing else. No personal notes, no travel brochures, no hotel information aside from the basic welcome packet." Vance ran a gloved finger over the desk surface. "This room is too clean, Jess. Too perfect. Feels sterilized. Like someone wanted to erase any trace of what happened here." He looked up at the ceiling, then back at the desk. "If she was killed elsewhere, where was it? And how did the killer get her out of the room, through the hotel, and up to the roof without being seen?" The surveillance footage would be crucial, but even with cameras, moving a body was no easy feat, especially in a busy hotel. Unless it happened in the dead of night, or the killer had an intimate knowledge of the hotel's blind spots. Back at the precinct, the forensics team had finished their preliminary sweep of Emily's room and sent their findings. Her laptop and phone were being analyzed by their digital forensics unit. The initial report confirmed Vance's gut feeling. No fingerprints in the room that didn't belong to Emily or hotel staff. No foreign hairs, no trace evidence of a struggle. It was a ghost room. Then a call came from Detective Miller, head of the Digital Forensics Unit. "Detective Vance, we've got something. Emily Hayes's work laptop. We finally cracked it." "And?" Vance asked, leaning forward in his chair. "It looks like she was corresponding with someone outside of her known professional network," Miller explained. "Encrypted messages, not through her company's secure channels. And the last one, sent just hours before she was last seen, is interesting." "What does it say?" Jessica prompted, now listening intently. "It's cryptic," Miller replied. "Just 2 words. The exchange. And a time. 0200H. No location, no sender ID, just a burner email address. And it was deleted immediately after being sent, but we recovered it from a temporary file cache." Vance felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. The exchange. 2 in the morning. That's the exact window when she disappeared, when the hotel's activity was at its lowest. And it points to a meeting, a clandestine one. "It does," Miller confirmed. "And here's the kicker, Detective. We found a single high-resolution photo file on her desktop, buried deep in a hidden folder. It's a blurred image, but it looks like a schematic diagram. For what, we can't tell, but it's not related to her company's work. And the file name? Orion_project_phase_3. The pieces, though scattered, were beginning to form a terrifying mosaic. Emily Hayes wasn't just a data analyst on a business trip. She was involved in something far more dangerous, something secret. The body in the hotel water tank was no random act of violence. It was a meticulously planned execution, designed to silence her, to hide the truth of the exchange and the Orion project. The investigation had just lurched violently into a world of corporate espionage, industrial secrets, or something even darker, where information was currency and lives were expendable. The water in that tank had indeed held a story, and it was only just beginning to reveal its chilling depths. Into a world of corporate espionage, industrial secrets, or something even darker, where information was currency and lives were expendable. The water in that tank had indeed held a story, and it was only just beginning to reveal its chilling depths. Detectives David Miller and Emily Carter felt the shift in the investigation almost immediately. The initial gut-wrenching shock of finding Amelia's body had given way to a colder, more calculating resolve. Her meticulous nature, her passion for detail, the very fabric of her professional life, now pointed away from a crime of passion or a random act of violence. This felt orchestrated, precise, and disturbingly professional. Their focus, therefore, had to pivot sharply from the personal to the professional. Amelia's work at Omnitech Solutions. Omnitech Solutions wasn't just another tech company. It was a titan, a gleaming monolith of innovation nestled in the heart of the city's tech district. Its headquarters, a towering structure of glass and steel, exuded an aura of cutting-edge brilliance and impenetrable security. As Miller and Carter approached the building, the air seemed to hum with the silent energy of 1,000 minds working on the next big breakthrough. This wasn't a place where secrets were merely kept. They were engineered. Their arrival was met with a polite yet firm corporate wall. They were immediately directed to a sleek, minimalist conference room where they were met not by HR, but by Ms. Evelyn Reed, Omnitech Senior Corporate Counsel. Ms. Reed was impeccably dressed, her demeanor as polished and unyielding as the marble table between them. She offered condolences for Amelia's passing, her voice devoid of genuine warmth, and then launched into a carefully rehearsed speech about company protocols, proprietary information, and the paramount importance of confidentiality. She granted them limited access, emphasizing that any questions regarding specific projects would be met with legal counsel present. First on their list was Sarah Jenkins, Amelia's cube-mate and closest colleague. Sarah was in her late 20s, her eyes red-rimmed and her posture slumped. Unlike Ms. Reed, Sarah's grief was raw and undeniable. She spoke of Amelia with genuine affection, describing her as brilliant, relentlessly ethical, and fiercely dedicated. Amelia wasn't just smart, she was good, Sarah choked out, her voice thick with emotion. She believed in doing things the right way, always. Sometimes I think that's what made her so isolated here. When asked about Amelia's recent projects, Sarah's gaze darted nervously to Ms. Reed, who sat silently observing them. She was the lead on Project Aurora, Sarah finally whispered. the name itself seeming to carry a weight. It's huge. The most ambitious thing Omnitech has ever done. Amelia poured her soul into it. Sarah then hesitated, chewing on her lip. She started acting strange a few weeks before she vanished. More secretive. She'd stay late, sometimes all night. She'd get these calls, always on her personal cell, and she'd go into an empty conference room. She looked tired, haunted even. She mentioned something just once about ethical implications and a vulnerability in Aurora. She said it was something big, something that could change everything, but she never elaborated. She just said she had to be sure, absolutely sure, before she said anything publicly. She was scared, I think. Genuinely scared. Sarah's voice dropped to a barely audible whisper. She told me she felt like she was being watched. Next, they interviewed Mark Davison, Amelia's direct supervisor and a senior project manager. Mark was everything Sarah wasn't. Smooth, confident, and radiating an air of controlled authority. He offered a practiced eulogy for Amelia, praising her technical prowess but subtly hinting at her intense personality and tendency to overthink minor details. When asked about Project Aurora, his tone became guarded, almost reverent. Project Aurora is Omnitech's magnum opus, Mark stated, his voice even. It's an advanced AI designed to optimize global critical infrastructure, power grids, transportation networks, communication systems. Imagine an AI that can predict and prevent blackouts before they happen, optimize traffic flow to eliminate congestion, or reroute data packets with unprecedented efficiency during a crisis. Its potential is limitless, truly paradigm-shifting. He acknowledged Amelia's role, calling her instrumental, but quickly dismissed Sarah's claims of Amelia discovering a vulnerability or ethical concerns as mere technical challenges common in any groundbreaking project. Amelia was brilliant, yes, Mark conceded, but she could also be zealous. She'd occasionally raise theoretical concerns that, while valid in a purely academic sense, didn't translate into practical security risks. All such concerns were thoroughly investigated and resolved. Project Aurora is secure, robust, and represents the future. His eyes held a flicker of something unreadable as he spoke, a practiced veneer that made Miller uneasy. He subtly implied Amelia might have been under stress, perhaps prone to exaggeration, subtly attempting to discredit her. As the detectives left Omnitech, the pieces began to click into place, forming a terrifying mosaic. Project Aurora wasn't just a high-stakes corporate endeavor. It was a global game-changer, an AI with the potential to wield unprecedented power over modern society. And Amelia, with her unwavering ethical compass and meticulous mind, had found something within it. Not a bug, but a deliberate design flaw, a backdoor, a critical vulnerability that could allow external manipulation or even weaponization of the AI. She hadn't just discovered a problem. She had uncovered a secret that someone or some group was willing to kill to protect. The implications were staggering. Amelia wasn't just a homicide victim. She was a casualty in a war for control over information, over technology that could shape the very future of nations. The water in that hotel tank had become a tomb for a brilliant mind that had stumbled upon a truth too dangerous to live with. The detectives were no longer chasing a murderer. They were pursuing ghosts in the machine, facing an adversary far more powerful and insidious than they could have imagined. This wasn't merely about justice for Amelia. It was about preventing a catastrophe. As they drove away from the gleaming Omnitech tower, Miller's phone buzzed. It was a text message from an unknown number. He opened it, his brow furrowing as he read the words. It was from Sarah Jenkins. The message was short, cryptic, and chilling. "It's not a bug, Sarah. It's a feature. And they know I know." Michael stared at the screen, the words burning themselves into his mind. "It's not a bug, Sarah. It's a feature. And they know I know." He tried to call the unknown number, but it went straight to a generic voicemail, then disconnected. He tried again, and this time the number was simply out of service. It was a burner or a dead line. He reread the message, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The syntax was chilling, like a final desperate thought captured in digital amber. "It's not a bug, Sarah." It was as if she were talking to herself, cementing a horrifying realization. The official narrative, the one everyone had swallowed. A system malfunction, an unfortunate accident, was a lie. A deliberate, calculated lie. It was a feature. What kind of feature? What kind of system would have a body in its water tank as a feature? And then the last part. And they know I know. That sent a jolt of ice through him. Sarah Jenkins, the environmental health specialist, had uncovered something. Something so profound, so dangerous that it had cost her her life. And whoever they were, they knew she was onto them. And now, by extension, they might know he knew. Michael felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. He wasn't just investigating a missing person anymore. He was staring down the barrel of a conspiracy, one that had already claimed a life and was now sending him ghost messages from the grave. He had to understand what Sarah knew, what feature she was talking about. And the only way to do that was to learn everything he could about Sarah Jenkins. He turned to his laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He started with basic searches. Sarah Jenkins, environmental health specialist. The results were immediate and plentiful. Sarah wasn't just some anonymous consultant. She had a reputation. He found articles profiling her work, commendations from various environmental agencies, even a few mentions of her being a tenacious advocate for public safety, often butting heads with powerful corporations over regulatory compliance. She was known for her integrity, her meticulousness, and her refusal to back down when she believed something was wrong. This wasn't someone who would shrug off a system malfunction. This was someone who would dig until she found the truth. He scrolled through her professional history. She had worked for state regulatory bodies for years before moving into private consulting, specializing in water quality and infrastructure audits for large commercial properties. This detail made the blood in his veins turn to ice. An environmental health specialist, specializing in water quality, found dead in a hotel water tank. It was too perfect, too horrifyingly coincidental. It wasn't a coincidence at all. It was a target. Michael dug deeper, narrowing his search to her recent projects. It took him a while, sifting through public records and professional databases that weren't easily accessible to the average person. But he had his ways, his contacts from his own past in investigative journalism. Finally, a crucial piece of information surfaced. 3 months ago, Sarah Jenkins had been contracted by a third-party environmental auditing firm, Aquasure Solutions, to conduct a comprehensive, deep-dive assessment of the Grandview Hotel's entire water management system. It wasn't a routine inspection. The contract specified a Level 3 forensic audit, a highly specialized and expensive process usually reserved for situations where there were existing concerns about system integrity or compliance. Why would the Grandview Hotel commission such an intense audit? And why through a third party, rather than their usual in-house maintenance? Unless they were trying to get an unbiased external opinion on something they already suspected was deeply wrong. Or perhaps they were trying to preemptively address a problem that was about to become public. Michael's mind raced. A Level 3 forensic audit. Sarah, the tenacious environmental health specialist. The cryptic message. It's not a bug, Sarah. It's a feature. And then her body found in the very system she was hired to scrutinize. He pulled up the public records related to the Grandview Hotel's recent renovations and operational changes. There had been rumors of a major overhaul to cut operating costs, specifically regarding energy and water consumption. He remembered seeing a small blurb in a local business journal about the Grandview implementing a cutting-edge, proprietary water purification and recycling system developed by a relatively unknown tech firm. The article had been vague, praising its innovative efficiency, but providing no technical details. What if that was the feature? A new, untested, or even illegal water treatment system designed to save the hotel millions, but which came with dangerous, undisclosed risks. A system that Sarah Jenkins, with her expertise and unwavering ethics, was hired to evaluate. Perhaps she discovered its flaws, its dangers, or its non-compliance with health regulations. Perhaps she was about to blow the whistle, and they, the architects of this feature, the people benefiting from it, found out. The thought sent a shiver down Michael's spine. This wasn't just about a body in a tank. It was about corporate greed, about powerful entities willing to sacrifice human lives for profit. Sarah's message wasn't a confession. It was a warning, a desperate plea for someone to finish what she started. He realized the immense danger he was now in. If they knew Sarah knew, and he now had Sarah's message in her professional history, it wouldn't be long before they connected the dots to him. He was no longer an impartial observer. He was a threat. He needed to find Sarah's audit report. That report, if it existed, would contain the truth. It would detail the feature and expose them. But where would it be? At Aquasure Solutions? At Sarah's home? Her office? Or had they already gotten to it, erasing all traces of her findings? Michael knew he couldn't go to the police yet. Without concrete evidence, his story would sound like a paranoid fantasy. He had to find that report. He had to find the proof. He had to finish what Sarah started before they came for him too. He closed his laptop, the glow of the screen reflecting the grim determination in his eyes. The game had just changed, and he was now a player whether he liked it or not. The grim determination in Michael's eyes hardened into a resolve he hadn't known he possessed. He had the proof. He had to finish what Sarah started before they came for him too. He closed his laptop, the glow of the screen reflecting the grim determination in his eyes. The game had just changed, and he was now a player whether he liked it or not. The first thing Michael did was secure Sarah's laptop. He found a small unmarked USB drive taped to the underside of the battery compartment, a detail only Sarah would have thought of. He copied everything, creating multiple encrypted backups. He wasn't a tech expert, but he knew enough to secure data. This wasn't just about finding justice for Sarah anymore. It was about survival. He spent the next few hours meticulously sifting through Sarah's digital breadcrumbs. Her files were a labyrinth of code and cryptic notes, but Michael remembered their late-night conversations, her passion for uncovering hidden truths. He found a heavily encrypted folder, simply labeled Project Hydra. He tried a few obvious passwords, Sarah's cat's name, their anniversary, but nothing worked. Then a memory surfaced, a shared inside joke about a particularly bad movie they'd seen, where the villain's catchphrase was, "The roots run deep." He typed it in a long shot. The folder unlocked. Inside, a torrent of information cascaded onto his screen. It wasn't just a few suspicious transactions. It was an entire ecosystem of financial malfeasance. Shell corporations with innocuous names like Evergreen Holdings LLC and Horizon Ventures Incorporated were linked to a dizzying array of offshore accounts. Sarah had meticulously tracked hundreds of transactions, each one leading back to a complex web of property acquisitions. The pattern was chillingly clear. Over the past 2 years, Evergreen Holdings had systematically acquired dozens of properties surrounding the Grandview Hotel. Not just small businesses or residential homes, but entire blocks of commercial real estate. The prices paid were consistently below market value, often with multiple, rapid transfers of ownership that obscured the true buyer. Sarah's notes highlighted instances of owners being strong-armed, offered take-it-or-leave-it deals, or facing sudden, insurmountable regulatory hurdles if they refused to sell. Michael cross-referenced the properties with public records. It all checked out. The Grandview Hotel, once a standalone landmark, was now an island in a sea of properties controlled by a single shadowy entity. Sarah's handwritten notes, scanned and embedded within the files, spoke of a Grandview redevelopment project, a massive urban renewal initiative that hadn't yet been publicly announced. She suspected Evergreen Holdings was a front for something much larger, something that would drastically transform the city's skyline and lining the pockets of those in power. The hotel itself, Michael realized, wasn't just a random location for Sarah's murder. It was the linchpin. Perhaps it was the last holdout property, or a crucial location for a clandestine meeting. Her death, tragic as it was, served a dual purpose: to silence her and to send a terrifying message to anyone else who dared to dig. He scrolled further, his heart pounding. Sarah had compiled a dossier on key players. Among them, a name jumped out: David Miller. Michael recognized it immediately. David Miller wasn't just a city council member. He was a rising star, known for his ambitious urban development proposals and his close ties to powerful business interests. Sarah had found an unsigned memorandum of understanding between Evergreen Holdings and David Miller, outlining a massive zoning change proposal that would fast-track the Grandview redevelopment project. The document detailed a land swap and tax incentives that disproportionately favored Evergreen Holdings, essentially handing them control over a significant portion of the city's future development for a pittance. This was it. This was the proof Sarah had risked everything for. It wasn't just about a body in a water tank. It was about systemic corruption, a powerful cabal leveraging their influence to reshape the city for their own gain. And Sarah, with her insatiable curiosity and unwavering moral compass, had stumbled right into the heart of it. A cold dread settled in Michael's stomach. He wasn't just dealing with a murderer anymore. He was up against a network of powerful, ruthless individuals who had already proven they would kill to protect their secrets. As if on cue, his phone buzzed with an incoming email. The sender was unknown. The subject line was blank. He opened it, his breath catching in his throat. It was a single image, a stark black and white photograph of the Grandview Hotel's water tank. It was empty, a gaping maw against the sky, and subtly, chillingly, a red X had been digitally drawn over it. There was no text, no message, just the image. A perfectly clear, perfectly terrifying warning. He tried to call Emily, his sister, his usual beacon of calm and reason. Her phone went straight to voicemail. He tried again. Same result. A knot tightened in his gut. He called Ben, his best friend, hoping for some grounding. Ben answered, but his voice was distant, preoccupied. "Dude, everything okay? You sound intense." "Look, I'm swamped at work. You're probably just overthinking things, man. Sarah's death was tragic, but the police are handling it, right?" The dismissive tone, the subtle impatience, it was like a cold shower. Ben, usually so empathetic, seemed to be actively avoiding the topic, or worse, subtly trying to dissuade him. Michael felt an icy wave of isolation wash over him. He wasn't just alone in this. He couldn't even trust his closest friends with the full truth, not yet. He hung up, the phone feeling heavy in his hand. He looked back at the laptop screen, the faces of David Miller and the logos of Evergreen Holdings staring back at him. They knew, or they suspected. They were watching. The warning wasn't just a threat. It was confirmation. He was in their crosshairs now. Michael needed to move carefully, strategically. He couldn't go to the police. They could be compromised or dismiss his claims as conspiracy theories. He needed an ally, someone outside the reach of Evergreen Holdings, someone who understood the murky world of deep-rooted corruption. Then, a name surfaced from Sarah's scattered notes, a small, almost illegible scribble. Asterisk Arthur Finch, retired investigative journalist, the watchdog. Asterisk Sarah had mentioned him once, a mentor who had taught her everything she knew about digging up dirt on the powerful. If anyone could help him navigate this treacherous landscape, it was Finch. Michael knew what he had to do. He had to secure the evidence, protect himself, and find Arthur Finch. The stakes were impossibly high, the danger palpable. He was no longer just a grieving friend. He was an accidental detective, thrust into a deadly game of cat and mouse. He was going to expose them no matter the cost. But first he had to survive. David's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat signaling pure, unadulterated terror. The air in the dimly lit corridor felt thick, oppressive, as if the walls themselves were closing in. He was exposed, vulnerable, and a target. Every shadow seemed to lengthen, every distant sound amplified into a potential threat. He had to get out. Now. He moved with a primal urgency, his mind a whirlwind of fear and a burgeoning resolve. He couldn't go back to his room, it was compromised. He couldn't go to the lobby. Too public, too easy to spot. His only option was to disappear, at least for a while. He needed to think, to breathe, to figure out how to fight back against an enemy he barely understood. He slipped down a service stairwell, the heavy fire door clanging shut behind him, echoing ominously in the concrete shaft. The stale air was cold, smelling faintly of disinfectant and dust. He descended 2 flights, his hand gripping the cold metal railing, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He emerged into another corridor, this one leading to the hotel's back entrance, a less frequented route used by staff and deliveries. He pushed through a heavy door marked staff only, blinking in the sudden rush of cool night air. He was in the alleyway behind the hotel, a narrow canyon of brick and dumpsters, lit by a single flickering fluorescent light. He pulled his phone from his pocket, his fingers trembling as he typed a quick message to his sister, Sarah. "If you don't hear from me by morning, call Detective Miller. Tell him about Emily, the hotel, everything." He didn't send it. Not yet. He couldn't involve Sarah unless he absolutely had to. He was alone in this. His mind raced back to Emily. What had she found? What secret was so damning that it cost her life? The image of the water tank, the official report, the chilling realization that it was all a meticulously crafted lie, burned in his mind. He remembered Emily's last frantic call, her hushed tones, the urgency in her voice. She had been onto something big, something far beyond a simple hotel scandal. He needed to piece together her last days, her last movements. He remembered her mentioning a secure cloud drive, a place where she kept all her sensitive research. A digital fortress. she'd called it, laughing. Only Emily would have such a thing. And only Emily would have left clues for him to find, knowing how tenacious he could be. But first he needed a sanctuary. He hailed a passing taxi, giving the driver an address in a quiet, unassuming neighborhood far from the glitz of the downtown hotel. As the taxi pulled away, David risked a glance back at the towering facade of the Grand Horizon. It no longer looked like a beacon of luxury. It looked like a gilded cage, a tomb. Inside the small, nondescript motel room he rented under a false name, David finally allowed himself to collapse onto the bed. His body ached, his mind was a maelstrom. He pulled out Emily's old tablet, the one she'd given him months ago, saying, "Just in case I ever disappear into the digital ether, you'll have a piece of me." He'd laughed then, dismissing it as her quirky humor. Now it felt like a lifeline. He powered it on, his heart pounding with a mix of dread and hope. The tablet was password protected, of course. Emily had always been meticulous about security. He tried her birthday, her cat's name, their anniversary. All failed. He racked his brain trying to think like Emily. What would be a secure, yet memorable password for her? He remembered a conversation they'd had about the first case they'd worked on together. A small local expose that had launched her career. She'd called it their Genesis moment. He typed in Genesis Horizon, adding the name of the hotel he now suspected was central to her demise. The screen flickered. Access granted. A flood of files appeared. Most were mundane, personal photos, old articles. But then he saw it. A folder labeled Project Hydra. Inside, a series of encrypted documents and audio files. His breath hitched. This was it. This was what Emily had been working on. He clicked on the most recent file, dated just 2 days before her accident. It was an audio recording. He pressed play and Emily's voice, clear yet tinged with a nervous energy, filled the silent room. Log entry October 17th. The deeper I dig, the more disturbing this becomes. It's not just the hotel. It's a network. The Grand Horizon is merely a front, a hub. They're laundering money, vast sums, through shell corporations tied to the hotel's expansion projects. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. The real horror is what they're doing with the data. David leaned forward, his eyes wide, his entire being focused on her words. They're not just collecting guest data for marketing. They're harvesting it. Everything. Biometrics, financial profiles, medical histories from connected devices. And they're selling it to the highest bidder. Governments, corporations, dark web entities. Identity theft on a scale that's unimaginable. And it's all facilitated by a proprietary AI system, Cerberus, designed by a shadowy tech firm, Orion Solutions, which, surprise, surprise, is also heavily invested in the Grand Horizon. David felt a chill run down his spine. This was far more sinister than he could have imagined. Emily wasn't just investigating a hotel. She was exposing a global data trafficking network. "I have proof," Emily's voice continued, a new urgency creeping in. "I managed to infiltrate a secondary server, a backup system that wasn't as well secured. I copied critical schematics of the Cerberus system, transaction ledgers, and encrypted communications between Orion Solutions and several high-profile individuals. The names. David, you wouldn't believe the names involved. Politicians, corporate titans, even a few intelligence agency contacts. This isn't just about money. It's about power control." Then a sudden shift in her tone. A gasp. A rustling sound. "Someone's here. I think they know." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I've hidden the primary evidence. A physical drive. Too risky to keep it all digital. It's in a place only you would think to look, David. Our old spot. The one we joked about being our treasure chest. The coordinates are in the last file. If anything happens to me, expose them. Don't let them get away with this." The recording ended with a faint click, followed by silence. David sat motionless, the tablet clutched in his hands. Emily hadn't just been murdered. She had been silenced to protect a monstrous secret. A secret that involved powerful individuals, a sophisticated AI, and the exploitation of millions. And now, he was the only one who knew. He was holding the key to unraveling it all. He scrolled to the last file Emily mentioned. It was a simple text document, titled Coordinates. He opened it, revealing a string of numbers. He recognized them instantly. It wasn't an address, but a set of geographical coordinates. Their treasure chest. the old abandoned lighthouse on the rugged coastline, miles north of the city. A place they'd explored as kids, a place only they knew about. It was remote, forgotten, and now potentially the most important location on Earth. He had to get there. But the danger was real, more real than ever. Emily had been discovered. They would assume she shared her information. They would be looking for anyone connected to her. And David had just made himself the primary target. Michael, the hotel manager, and Jessica, the enigmatic woman, were just two pieces of a much larger, darker puzzle. He knew he couldn't go to the police yet. Not without the physical evidence Emily had hidden. Without it, his story would sound like the ravings of a grieving, paranoid man. With it, he could bring down an empire. He spent the rest of the night meticulously going through the files on Emily's tablet. The schematics of Cerberus were intricate, detailing how the AI could cross-reference seemingly disparate data points to build comprehensive profiles. The transaction ledgers were mind-boggling, showing billions flowing through a labyrinthine network of shell companies. The communications were coded, but even glancing at them, David could sense the gravity of their content. As dawn approached, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, David felt a grim determination settle over him. Fear was still a cold knot in his stomach, but it was now tempered with a burning rage and a fierce sense of purpose. Emily had entrusted him with her final mission. He wouldn't fail her. He knew his next move. He had to reach the lighthouse. He had to retrieve that physical evidence. But he couldn't just walk out into the open. He was being hunted. He needed a plan, a way to move unseen, to anticipate their next move. They had underestimated Emily, and they were probably underestimating him. That was his only advantage. He had to use it. He packed a small bag, taking only essentials. He deleted the files from Emily's tablet, knowing he couldn't risk carrying them. He'd memorized the coordinates. The tablet itself he slipped into a hidden compartment in his worn backpack, a last resort in case he needed to prove its existence. He took a moment to look at a small, framed photo of Emily on the motel nightstand, a warm smile gracing her face. "I'm coming, Em," he whispered. "I'm going to finish what you started." The journey to the lighthouse would be fraught with peril. He imagined every car on the road, every passerby as a potential threat. He had to be smarter, faster, more invisible than they could ever anticipate. He was no longer just a grieving friend. He was a shadow moving through the periphery, assembling the pieces of a deadly puzzle. The clock was ticking. The hunt was on. And David, armed with Emily's final clues and a desperate courage, was ready to face whatever horrors awaited him. David, armed with Emily's final clues and a desperate courage, was ready to face whatever horrors awaited him. The silence in Emily's apartment was heavy, a suffocating blanket of grief and unanswered questions. David moved through it, a ghost in a place haunted by his friend's vibrant memory. Emily had been meticulous, organized, a digital archivist of the highest order. He remembered her obsession with secure data, with leaving breadcrumbs. He retraced her steps, mentally replaying their last conversations, searching for a hint, a subtle gesture, anything he might have missed. Hours blurred into an agonizing search. He checked her usual hiding spots, under loose floorboards, behind fake outlets, even inside a hollowed-out book on her shelf. Nothing. Despair began to creep in, cold and sharp. Had he misunderstood? Had Emily's last desperate act been a dead end? He sank onto her worn armchair, defeated, his gaze falling upon her laptop, still sitting on her desk. It was password protected, of course, encrypted to the hilt. Emily had always joked that her digital fortress was more secure than Fort Knox. But then a memory sparked. A late-night conversation over cheap takeout and too much coffee, about a specific, almost childish mnemonic she used for her most important, most secret projects. A sequence of numbers and letters tied to a shared, silly inside joke from their college days. He typed it in, his fingers trembling. The screen flickered, then granted access. A single, ominously labeled folder sat on the desktop. Project Hydra. David clicked it, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Inside, it wasn't just documents, it was a digital vault. Encrypted folders nested within folders. A labyrinth designed to deter all but the most determined. But Emily had left him a map. A text file, cleverly disguised as a system log, contained a series of passphrase, each one a fragment of another shared memory, another inside joke. He worked his way through, each successful decryption revealing more fragments of a horrifying truth. What he uncovered was not just a cover-up, but a vast, intricate web of deceit, corruption, and murder that stretched far beyond the confines of the Grandview Hotel. Jessica Miller, the woman whose body had been found in the water tank, wasn't just a guest. She was an investigative journalist, operating undercover, meticulously documenting a massive financial fraud. The mastermind behind it all, the true viper at the heart of the operation, was a man named Victor Thorne. Thorne wasn't just a wealthy investor. He was the primary financier behind the Grandview Hotel's recent expansion, a shadowy figure with deep connections and an even deeper appetite for illicit gains. Jessica had been tracking Thorne for months, gathering irrefutable evidence of his money laundering operations, his use of the Grandview as a front for shell companies, and his systematic defrauding of unsuspecting investors. She had compiled a dossier of bank transfers, forged documents, and incriminating emails. She was close to breaking the story, to exposing Thorne to the world. Emily's files painted a chilling picture of Jessica's final days. Jessica had confronted Thorne, armed with her evidence, hoping to force his hand, perhaps even secure a confession. Instead, Thorne had lured her to a secluded part of the hotel, an isolated storage area near the rooftop access, under the pretense of a private meeting. There he had silenced her. The water tank, a grotesque and opportunistic choice, had been his desperate attempt to dispose of the body, to make it disappear, to let the water obscure the truth of her end. And Emily had been Jessica's contact, her independent researcher, helping to verify leads and cross-reference data. She hadn't known the full extent of the danger until Jessica vanished. Driven by a tenacious sense of justice and a growing fear, Emily had picked up where Jessica left off. She had continued to dig, to piece together the remaining fragments, to complete Jessica's work. She had discovered the extent of Thorne's power, his willingness to eliminate anyone who threatened his empire. The files also contained a series of audio recordings. David's stomach churned as he listened, his blood running cold. One recording, distorted but undeniably clear, captured a terrified Mr. Harrison, the hotel manager, confessing his complicity. Harrison hadn't killed Jessica, but he was Thorne's pawn, coerced into managing the cover-up. Thorne had threatened his family, his livelihood, and promised him a share of the illicit profits if he kept silent and obstructed the police investigation. Harrison's role was to deflect, to misdirect, to ensure no one looked too closely at Thorne or the hotel's financials. He had been the one to move Emily's body, or at least facilitate its movement, after Thorne had dealt with her, making it appear as a random, tragic accident to further derail any real investigation. The weight of it all pressed down on David, a crushing wave of horror and righteous fury. Jessica, a brave journalist, murdered for seeking the truth. Emily, his kind, brilliant friend, silenced for trying to finish that work. And Thorne, a monster in human skin, hiding behind a facade of respectability, his hands dripping with blood. David closed the laptop, the screen reflecting his own haunted face. He couldn't go to the police. Not yet. Thorne was too powerful, his connections too deep. The evidence, though damning, could easily be spun, discredited, or worse, disappear. David knew that Thorne would move mountains to bury this. He needed to expose Thorne in a way that couldn't be ignored, couldn't be swept under the rug. He had to confront him. A cold, calculated resolve settled over David. He was no detective, no hero. He was just a man driven by grief and a desperate need for justice. He spent the next few hours meticulously copying the entire Project Hydra file onto multiple encrypted drives, attaching a detailed explanation, and setting up a dead man's switch, a timed release of the information to multiple trusted news outlets and law enforcement contacts, configured to activate if he didn't check in every few hours. He sent a coded message to a contact he knew would act, a former colleague from their university days who now worked for a major online investigative news platform. If David disappeared, the story would break. Thorne wouldn't escape. He found an address for Victor Thorne in one of Emily's financial reports. A sprawling, secluded estate nestled deep in the countryside, miles outside the city. It was a fortress, a lair befitting a predator. He knew going there was madness, a suicide mission perhaps. But the thought of Emily, of Jessica, fueled a fire in his belly that extinguished all fear. He grabbed his car keys, a small heavy wrench he found in Emily's toolbox. A crude, desperate weapon, but better than nothing. And the most critical of the encrypted USB drives, tucking it deep into his pocket. The drive contained the unvarnished truth, the key to unlocking the entire conspiracy. The drive to Thorne's estate was a blur of highway and darkening country roads. Each mile that passed felt like a step further into an abyss. The setting sun cast long, ominous shadows across the landscape, mirroring the darkness swirling within David. He thought of Emily's last words, her plea for him to finish what she started. He wouldn't let her down. He couldn't. Finally, the GPS announced his arrival. Towering iron gates flanked by high stone walls loomed before him, crowned with security cameras. Beyond them, a winding drive disappeared into a thick canopy of old-growth trees, hinting at the opulent, isolated mansion hidden within. The air grew heavy, thick with an unspoken menace. David took a deep breath, the metallic tang of fear and determination filling his lungs. He was here. He was ready. This was it. David's hand, slick with nervous sweat, closed around the cold metal of the gate. It wasn't locked. A subtle creak was the only sound as he pushed it open, stepping onto a gravel path that crunched under his feet like shattered glass. The mansion loomed, a monstrous silhouette against the bruised dusk sky, its windows like vacant eyes staring out into the encroaching darkness. Every instinct screamed at him to turn back, but Sarah's face, etched with a journalist's fierce determination, flashed in his mind. He continued, his footsteps echoing too loudly in the oppressive silence. He found an unlocked side door, a relic of an era when security was an afterthought to grandeur. The interior was a mausoleum of forgotten opulence, dust motes dancing in the slivers of moonlight that pierced the heavy drapes. The air was stale, thick with the scent of aged wood and something else. Something metallic and faintly chemical, a smell he now recognized from the hotel's tap water. He moved through dimly lit hallways, past portraits of stern-faced ancestors, their eyes seeming to follow him. He knew Victor was here. He could feel it. A faint light emanated from a room at the back of the house. As David drew closer, he heard muffled voices, one agitated, the other low and gravelly. He pressed himself against the doorframe, straining to hear. "Can't keep this up, Father." The pressure, the questions, it's unraveling. That was Victor. His voice was ragged, laced with panic. "Silence, boy. We have endured for generations. A few prying eyes will not be our undoing." The second voice was older, colder, infused with an unshakable authority. A chill ran down David's spine. Elias Thorne, the patriarch. David pushed the door open, stepping into the room. It was a study filled with antique maps and leather-bound books. Victor, looking pale and disheveled, stood by a large desk, facing an imposing figure seated in a high-backed chair, Elias Thorne. The old man's eyes, sharp and intelligent, fixed on David, betraying no surprise, only a flicker of annoyance. "Well, well. It seems the little journalist has found his way home," Elias drawled, his voice a silken menace. "Victor, I told you to deal with this nuisance." Victor flinched, turning to David with a look of desperate resignation. "David, you shouldn't have come." "I'm here for Sarah," David stated, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "And for the truth about the hotel, about what's really going on." Elias let out a dry, humorless chuckle. "The truth, Mr. Miller, is often far less palatable than fiction. Sit. Perhaps you'd like a drink. It will be a long story." David remained standing, his gaze unwavering. "Start with the water tank. And the body." Victor shifted nervously. Elias sighed, a theatrical gesture. "Very well. Since you've stumbled so far into our little secret. The Grandview Hotel, Mr. Miller, was once the jewel of the region. But times change. Fortunes dwindle. The land, however, the land always holds value. We discovered it years ago. A rare mineral deposit, deep beneath the hotel. Incredibly valuable, but extracting it complicated. Environmentally unsound, highly illegal. The hotel became a front," David deduced, a knot tightening in his stomach. "A cover for a mining operation." "Precisely," Elias confirmed, a hint of pride in his tone. "We needed a discreet way to manage the operation, to dispose of waste, to keep prying eyes away. The old water tank. A stroke of genius, really. Modified, reinforced. It became an access shaft, a disposal chute when necessary. The strange water quality? A regrettable side effect of the mining seeping into the antiquated plumbing system. We simply blamed it on old pipes and tried to manage appearances." "And the body?" David pressed, his heart pounding. "Who was it?" Victor finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. Marco. Marco Rossi. He was a worker, an immigrant we brought in for the excavation. He was difficult. He found out too much, threatened to expose us. My father, he handled it. Elias waved a dismissive hand. A necessary unpleasantness. He became a liability. We disposed of his body in the tank, hoping the mineral-rich environment would accelerate decomposition, obscure any forensic evidence. It worked for years. David felt a wave of nausea. So the body in the water tank wasn't Sarah's. Victor shook his head, his eyes haunted. No, Sarah was different. She was an investigative journalist. She wasn't interested in ghosts or bad plumbing. She was looking into the environmental reports, the strange geological activity around the hotel. She was getting too close to the truth about the mining operation. She found evidence, didn't she? David asked, his voice raw. That's why she disappeared. She did, Victor confessed, his gaze dropping to the floor. She snuck into the sub-basements, discovered the hidden shafts, the equipment. She had a camera, files. She was going to expose everything. Elias interjected, his voice chillingly calm. Victor confronted her. A desperate attempt to protect our family, our legacy. It was an accident, of course. An accident? David scoffed, his anger flaring. Victor looked up, his eyes pleading. I swear I didn't mean to. We struggled. She tried to get away, to run with the evidence. There's an old, disused service elevator shaft, decades old, hidden behind a false wall in the laundry room. It dropped straight down into the earth, deeper than the sub-basement. Pushed her. She lost her footing. It was dark. She fell. He choked on the words, tears welling in his eyes. I never saw her again. We searched, but the shaft leads into the deeper mining tunnels. We couldn't find her body. We buried the evidence, sealed the shaft, and hoped she'd simply be another missing person, lost to the curse of the Grandview. David stared at them, a cold dread settling in his stomach. Sarah, brilliant and fearless, lost to the depths of their greed. And the ghost stories? The strange noises? My doing, Victor admitted, a bitter laugh escaping him. I amplified the local legends, made sure the staff spoke of strange sightings. I would even create some myself late at night in the abandoned wings. Anything to keep people away from the deeper secrets, the places Sarah had found. A clever distraction, Elias added, a faint smile playing on his lips. It kept the curious at bay, and the local police dismissed any unusual activity as mere superstition. We had perfected the art of making things disappear, Mr. Miller. People problems, even entire truths. Not anymore, David declared, pulling his phone from his pocket. I've been recording this entire conversation, and the police are on their way. I tipped them off before I came here, told them if I didn't call them back within the hour, they should raid the mansion. Elias's cold composure finally cracked. His eyes narrowed, a flash of pure fury in their depths. You fool! You think you can walk in here, threaten the Thorne family, and walk out alive? He lunged, a surprising burst of speed for a man his age, grabbing a heavy bronze letter opener from his desk. David reacted instantly, sidestepping the attack. Victor, caught between his father's rage and David's revelation, stood frozen for a moment. Elias swung again, the sharp point glinting in the dim light. David dodged, knocking over a stack of books, creating a clatter that echoed through the silent house. Father, no! Victor cried out, finally breaking his stupor, moving to intervene. Elias, fueled by desperation, was relentless. He lunged at David, catching his arm, the letter opener slicing a shallow cut. Pain shot through David, but he used the momentum, twisting away and pushing Elias back against the desk. The old man stumbled, dropping the weapon. Just then, the distant wail of sirens pierced the night, growing louder with each passing second. Elias's face contorted in a snarl of defeat and rage. Victor sank into a chair, his head in his hands, broken. Footsteps pounded on the gravel outside, then on the wooden floors within. Moments later, uniformed officers burst into the study, weapons drawn. Police! Hands where I can see them! David raised his hands, his heart still hammering, adrenaline coursing through him. He looked at Victor, then at Elias, who stood defiantly, his eyes still burning with an unrepentant fury. The truth finally had found its way out. The investigation that followed ripped through the quiet community like a wildfire. The Grandview Hotel, once a local landmark, became a crime scene, then a symbol of hidden malice. The illegal mining operation was exposed, revealing years of environmental damage and the exploitation of vulnerable workers. Marco Rossi's body was exhumed from the water tank, providing the final, undeniable proof of the Thorns' depravity. Based on Victor's confession and David's recorded evidence, a massive search operation was launched in the labyrinthine tunnels beneath the mansion. Weeks later, deep within a collapsed section of an old mining shaft, they found her. Sarah Jenkins. Her camera, still clutched in her hand, contained the damning photos and videos that would bring down the Thorn Empire. David, though physically recovered, carried the scars of his journey. The image of Sarah's determined face, the chilling confession of Victor, and the cold ruthlessness of Elias Thorn would forever be etched into his memory. The story he had chased, the truth he had unearthed, was a testament to courage, but also a stark reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of beauty, beneath the veneer of history, and within the hearts of men. The Grandview Hotel ultimately was razed to the ground, its secrets finally laid bare, its treacherous waters forever stilled. But the echoes of what happened there, the chilling tale of the body in the hotel water tank, would forever serve as a whispered warning in the collective memory, a haunting testament to the price of truth.